In the vast emptiness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that every species learns too late. The universe doesn't care about your technology, your wisdom, or your ancient heritage. It only cares about one thing: survival. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had ruled the Andromeda Spiral with ships that drank pure starlight like wine, vessels so advanced they made planets weep with envy. Their star drinkers could cross galaxies in heartbeats, bend reality to their will, and harness the very essence of dying suns. They were gods among mortals, until the day their godlike technology simply stopped working. Now, in a forgotten corner of space, the last of their magnificent vessels drifts like a tomb, its starlight engines cold as the void itself. The greatest minds of a dozen species have tried and failed to understand what went wrong. Quantum physicists, reality engineers, masters of dark matter manipulation, all have walked away defeated. But sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes it takes a species that barely crawled out of their gravity well, a people who still use combustion engines, and think duct tape is a valid repair solution to solve problems that would make ancient gods weep. Sometimes it takes a human, and humans, as the galaxy is about to learn, have a very different relationship with broken things. Marcus Chun had seen a lot of broken things in his 32 years. Broken cars, broken relationships, broken dreams. But he had never seen anything quite like the massive ship floating dead in space before him. The vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull gleaming with an opalescent material that seemed to shift colors even in the harsh light of the nearby blue giant star. Elegant curves and impossible angles suggested a technology so advanced it bordered on art. Yet for all its beauty, the ship was as lifeless as a discarded bottle. "That's her," said Captain Yara Okafor, her dark hands steady on the controls of their tiny human salvage vessel. The luminous dawn, last of the Zephyrian star drinkers. Marcus pressed his face against the reinforced viewport, his breath fogging the glass. How long has she been drifting? 17 years, according to the Galactic Salvage Registry. The Zephyrians abandoned her when their star drive technology started failing across the Empire. No one knows why their ships just stopped working, but when they did, it brought down the most powerful civilization in known space. The small human ship, barely the size of city bus, looked like a gnat approaching a whale as they drew closer to the Zephyrian vessel. Marcus had volunteered for this mission partly out of curiosity and partly because the salvage rights could set him up for life. The Galactic Council had put a bounty on anyone who could get even one Zephyrian ship operational again. Every major species had tried and failed. "You sure about this, Marcus?" Yara asked, her Nigerian accent lending warmth to her concern. The Altarians sent their best quantum engineers. The vegan collective brought reality manipulators. Even the crystalline hegemony tried their probability dancers. All of them came back empty-handed. Marcus shrugged, adjusting the tool belt around his waist. It looked primitive compared to the exotic technologies other species had brought to bear on this problem. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a multimeter, some electrical tape, and a tablet loaded with human engineering databases. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they were thinking too hard. The docking process took 2 hours. Zephyrian technology had been designed for their own graceful, tentacled forms, not for the stubby appendages of humans. But Marcus was patient, and eventually they managed to create a sealed connection between their ship and one of the Luminous Dawn's auxiliary airlocks. Stepping aboard the alien vessel was like entering a cathedral built by mad poets. The corridors curved in ways that shouldn't have been possible, lined with walls that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Everything was sized for beings much taller than humans, with controls placed at seemingly random heights and angles. Environmental systems are still functioning, Yara reported, checking her readings. Gravity, atmosphere, temperature, all within human norms. Whatever happened to this ship, it didn't affect the basic life support. They made their way through the eerily quiet corridors, following the ship's layout that Marcus had studied during the journey here. The Luminous Dawn was designed around a central core where the star drive was housed. This was the heart of Zephyrian technology, the mystical engine that could somehow harvest energy directly from stellar radiation and convert it into faster-than-light propulsion. The chamber that housed the star drive was vast, easily the size of a football stadium. At its center sat a sphere of impossible beauty, perhaps 30 meters in diameter, made from the same opalescent material as the ship's hull. It should have been blazing with captured starlight, pulsing with the power of a captive sun. Instead, it sat dark and cold, surrounded by monitoring equipment and control stations that had been abandoned years ago. Marcus approached one of the control stations, running his hands over the smooth, curved surfaces. The interface was intuitive enough. The Zephyrians had designed their technology to be operated through direct neural connection, but there were manual backups that could be operated by touch. According to the records, Yara said, consulting her tablet, the star drive just stopped responding to commands one day. No warning, no gradual degradation. The crew tried everything, but the core wouldn't accept Starlight anymore. Like it just forgot how to work. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the massive sphere. He pulled out a simple flashlight and shone it on the surface, watching how the light reflected and refracted through the strange material. To his engineers, it looked almost like crystal, but crystal that had been grown rather than cut. "What are you thinking?" Yara asked. "I'm thinking that maybe everyone else has been approaching this wrong," Marcus replied. He knelt down beside one of the control stations, running his fingers along its base. "Look at this. See how the connections run into the floor? The whole ship is one integrated system. You can't just fix the engine without understanding how it connects to everything else." He pulled out his multimeter and began testing the connections. The readings were strange. There was power flowing through the ship's systems, but it was fragmented, interrupted, like a car with a bad alternator that couldn't quite keep the battery charged. The other species that tried to fix this, Marcus said as he worked, they all focused on the star drive itself. They tried to understand the quantum mechanics, the exotic matter interactions, the probability matrices. But they missed something basic. "What's that?" Marcus stood up and looked around the chamber, his eyes following the graceful lines of conduits and connections that fed into the central sphere. They forgot that before you can understand how something works, you have to understand why it stopped working. He spent the next several hours mapping the ship's systems, tracing power conduits and data connections with the methodical patience of a human engineer. It was tedious work, made more difficult by the alien architecture and the need to translate Zephyrian technical concepts into human terms. But gradually a picture began to emerge. "It's like a nervous system," he explained to Yara as they took a break in what might have been the ship's equivalent of a cafeteria. "The star drive isn't just an engine. It's the brain of the ship, connected to every system through these crystalline conduits. The whole vessel is alive in a way, responsive to the intentions of its crew." "So what went wrong?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Have you ever owned a plant?" Yara blinked at the apparent non sequitur. "Yes, actually. A succulent my grandmother gave me." "What happened to it?" "It died. I couldn't figure out why. I gave it water, kept it in sunlight, but it just gradually faded away." "Did you talk to it?" "Talk to it? It was a plant, Marcus. That's what I thought too, until my sister taught me something. She's got this amazing garden, and I asked her the secret. You know what she said? She said plants respond to attention. Not just water and sunlight, but actual emotional connection. She talks to her plants, touches them, spends time with them. They thrive because they feel cared for." Yara stared at him. "You think the ship is like a plant?" "I think the ship is lonely." The idea sounded crazy even as he said it, but the more Marcus thought about it, the more sense it made. The Zephyrians had built their technology around biological principles. Their ships were grown rather than constructed, shaped by will and intention as much as by engineering. The star drive didn't just convert stellar energy, it channeled the life force of the cosmos itself. "Think about it," he continued. "The luminous dawn has been drifting alone for 17 years. No crew, no purpose, no connection to the stars it was meant to sail between. Maybe it didn't break down. Maybe it just gave up. They returned to the star drive chamber as the ship's artificial day cycle shifted toward evening. Marcus approached the dark sphere at the chamber's heart, placing his hands against its cool surface. The material felt smooth, but somehow organic, like touching the shell of some vast, sleeping creature. "I know this sounds stupid," he said quietly, "but I'm going to try something." He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what the ship must have felt like when it was alive. The rush of starlight through its crystalline veins, the joy of dancing between worlds, the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. He thought about loneliness, about being abandoned and forgotten, about the gradual fading of hope. "Hello," he whispered to the sphere. "I know you're tired. I know you've been alone for a long time. But I'm here now. I want to understand." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the crystal, something flickered. It was faint, barely visible, like the first spark of a fire trying to catch. But it was there. Yara gasped. "Marcus, did you see that?" The light grew stronger, pulsing gently in the heart of the sphere. Around the chamber, dormant displays began to activate, showing readouts in flowing Zephyrian script. The ship itself seemed to sigh, a subtle vibration that ran through the deck plating. Marcus kept his hands pressed against the sphere, feeling its warmth beginning to return. "That's it," he murmured. "You remember, don't you? You remember what it feels like to be alive." The star drive was awakening, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. 17 years of dormancy couldn't be undone in a moment. The ship would need time, care, and patience to remember its purpose. It would need someone who understood that technology, no matter how advanced, was ultimately about connection. As the first genuine starlight in nearly 2 decades began to pulse through the luminous dawn's crystalline heart, Marcus smiled. The hardest part wasn't going to be fixing the ship. It was going to be teaching the galaxy that sometimes the most sophisticated technology required the most human solution of all. The awakening of a luminous dawn was not the explosive return to life that Marcus had expected. Instead, it was gradual, almost hesitant, like watching someone recover from a long illness. Over the next few days, systems throughout the ship began to flicker back online, but they did so in fits and starts, as if the vessel itself was unsure whether to trust this new attention. Marcus had established a routine. Each morning, he would make his way to the star drive chamber and spend an hour simply sitting beside the great sphere, talking to it about human things. He told it about Earth, about the cities and forests and oceans that had shaped humanity's understanding of beauty. He described the feeling of wind and rain, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the simple pleasure of a good meal shared with friends. "The thing about humans," he said on the 4th day, his hand resting on the sphere's warming surface, "is that we're really good at loving broken things. We keep old cars running decades past their expiration date. We nurse injured animals back to health. We read books until the pages fall out, then tape them back together and keep reading." The starlight within the sphere pulsed more steadily now, casting rainbow patterns on the chamber walls. Yara had been monitoring the ship's systems, and her reports grew more encouraging each day. Life support was optimizing itself, gravity generators were stabilizing, and the ship's bioneural network was slowly reintegrating its scattered components. But Marcus knew they still had a long way to go. The sphere was responding to his presence, but it wasn't yet ready to accept stellar energy and convert it into the exotic matter that powered Zephyrian faster-than-light travel. That would require a deeper connection, a more complete understanding of what the ship truly needed. On the 5th day, everything changed. Marcus was in the star drive chamber, as usual, running diagnostics on the peripheral systems, when the sphere suddenly blazed with brilliant light. He stumbled backward, momentarily blinded, as every display in the chamber activated at once. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy, and, for a terrifying moment, Marcus thought he had triggered some kind of catastrophic overload. Then, the light dimmed to a comfortable glow, and Marcus found himself staring at something impossible. The sphere had become transparent, revealing its inner structure for the first time. Inside, suspended in what looked like liquid starlight, was a complex crystalline matrix unlike anything he had ever seen. It pulsed with its own rhythm, like a vast, geometric heart. "Yara," he called over the comm, his voice hoarse with amazement. "You need to see this." When she arrived, Yara's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth open, staring at the revealed heart of Zephyrian technology with the wonder of someone seeing magic made manifest. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "it's trying to show us how it works." The crystalline matrix was incredibly complex, with layers upon layers of interconnected structures that seemed to extend into dimensions Marcus couldn't quite perceive. But as he watched, patterns began to emerge. The way energy flowed through certain pathways, the resonance frequencies that kept the whole system stable, the delicate balance between order and chaos that allowed the star drive to function. More importantly, he began to understand what was missing. "It's a biological system," he realized aloud, "not mechanical. The Zephyrians didn't build this drive, they grew it. And like any living thing, it needs more than just fuel to survive." Yara moved closer, her scientific curiosity overcoming her initial shock. "What does it need?" Marcus studied the patterns of light flowing through the crystalline matrix. There were gaps, dark spaces where connections should have existed, but had somehow been severed. The ship hadn't just lost power, it had lost pieces of itself. "Purpose," he said finally. "It needs to remember why it exists." Understanding the problem was one thing. Solving it was another matter entirely. Marcus spent the next week trying to comprehend the bioneural architecture that governed the luminous dawn's consciousness. It was like trying to perform brain surgery with a hammer and chisel, but gradually he began to piece together how this system was supposed to function. The Zephyrians had designed their ships to be more than vehicles. They were partners, companions in the vast journey between stars. The crew didn't just operate the ship, they formed a symbiotic relationship with it, sharing thoughts, emotions, and dreams across the bioneural interface. The ship drew strength from these connections, using them to maintain the delicate balance required for star drive operation. When the Zephyrians abandoned their vessels, they had severed these connections abruptly, leaving the ships isolated and confused. Over time, the lack of symbiotic feedback had caused the bioneural networks to degrade, taking the star drives offline. "So how we fix it?" Yara asked during one of their planning sessions. Marcus had been thinking about that for days. The obvious solution was to re-establish the bioneural connection, but that presented a significant problem. The interface had been designed for Zephyrian neurology, not human brains. Any attempt to connect directly could be fatal, unless they found another way. "What if we don't try to replicate the original connection?" he suggested. "What if we create something new?" The idea was radical, possibly insane, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it might work. Instead of trying to interface with the ship's consciousness directly, they could create a bridge, a translation layer that would allow human thought patterns to communicate with Zephyrian bioneural networks. The work was painstaking and dangerous. Marcus had to tap into the ship's consciousness matrix while carefully monitoring his own neural activity, using his tablet to record the electromagnetic patterns that seemed to resonate with the crystalline structure. It was like learning to speak a language that existed only in harmonics and quantum fluctuations. The breakthrough came on the 10th day. Marcus was sitting beside the sphere, his tablet connected to a jury-rigged interface he had constructed from salvaged components and human electronics. He was trying to match the frequency patterns he had observed in the star drive's crystal matrix, adjusting the signal until it aligned with the ship's bioneural rhythm. Suddenly, the tablet screen exploded with data. Not random noise, but structured information, thoughts, emotions, and sensations that weren't his own. For one terrifying, wonderful moment, Marcus felt what it was like to be the luminous dawn. He experienced the ship's memories, the joy of its first flight, when young Zephyrian engineers had guided it through its maiden voyage between stars. The satisfaction of missions completed, passengers safely delivered, cargo transported across impossible distances. The gradual dimming of purpose as the Empire's decline began, and the final devastating moment when the last crew member severed their connection and walked away. But he also felt something else, hope. The ship recognized his efforts, understood his intentions, and was willing to trust him with its most precious secrets. The connection lasted only seconds before Marcus had to break it off, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of alien thought. But it was enough. He had established the bridge. Over the following days, Marcus refined the interface, learning to communicate with the ship in increasingly complex ways. He taught it about human concepts of loyalty and dedication, showed how his species formed bonds with their tools and machines, demonstrated the human capacity for care and maintenance that could keep things running far beyond their design lifespan. In return, the ship shared its own understanding of existence. It showed him how stellar energy could be woven into the fabric of space-time, how matter and consciousness were merely different expressions of the same underlying reality, how the universe itself was alive in ways that most species never suspected. The transformation in a luminous dawn was remarkable. Systems that had been dormant for 17 years came back online with increasing sophistication. The ship's bioneural network began rewiring itself, adapting to Marcus's human patterns while retaining its essential Zephyrian nature. It was creating something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness that bridged two completely different forms of life. But the most dramatic change came when Marcus finally felt confident enough to attempt feeding stellar energy into the star drive. They had moved the salvage ship to a safe distance, just in case something went wrong. Marcus sat in the star drive chamber with his makeshift interface, feeling the ship's consciousness flowing through the connection like warm sunlight. Together, they reached out toward the nearby blue giant star, opening pathways that had been closed for nearly 2 decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Stellar energy poured into the ship's crystalline matrix, but instead of the chaotic overload that had destroyed other Zephyrian vessels, the flow was controlled, directed, transformed. The luminous dawn drank deeply of Starlight, its systems blazing to full power for the first time since the Empire's fall. Around Marcus, the star drive chamber became a symphony of light and sound. The sphere at its heart no longer seemed like a piece of technology. It was a living thing, breathing with the rhythm of distant suns, singing with harmonics that resonated in the quantum foam itself. Marcus, Yara's voice crackled over the comm, filled with amazement. The ship's moving. It's actually moving under its own power. Marcus could feel it through the neural connection, the luminous dawn stretching itself after its long sleep, testing systems that had been dormant for so long. Engines that could manipulate space-time itself came online, gravity generators that could create pockets of accelerated existence, shields that could turn aside the fury of stellar winds. But, more than that, he could feel the ship's joy. After 17 years of loneliness and abandonment, the luminous dawn was alive again, connected to another conscious being who understood its purpose and valued its existence. The hardest part had been getting the ship to trust him. The second hardest part would be getting the galaxy to trust what he had accomplished. Because Marcus Chun, human mechanic and unexpected xenobiologist, had just done something that every major species in the galaxy had declared impossible. He had not only repaired Zephyrian star drive technology, he had improved it, creating a new form of consciousness that bridged the gap between species. And that was going to make a lot of very powerful people very uncomfortable. Word of Marcus's success spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within 48 hours of the luminous dawn's resurrection, their small salvage operation was surrounded by ships from a dozen different species, all demanding to know how a primitive human had accomplished what their greatest minds had failed to achieve. The first to arrive were the Altarians, their sleek vessels materializing out of quantum foam with typical precision. Ambassador Ketron Vel9 materialized on the salvage ship's bridge in a shower of blue light, his crystalline form humming with barely contained energy. Human Marcus Chun, he announced, his voice resonating through harmonic frequencies that made the deck plating vibrate. The Altarian Collective demands immediate access to your restoration techniques. This technology belongs to civilization, not to individual profit seekers. Marcus was in the middle of calibrating the neural interface when the ambassador arrived. He didn't look up from his work, though he could feel the ship's consciousness stirring with what felt remarkably like amusement at the Altarian's pompous declaration. The technology belongs to the luminous dawn, Marcus replied calmly. And she gets to decide who she works with. The pronoun was deliberate. Marcus had learned to think of the ship as a living being rather than a machine, and the distinction mattered more than most people realized. The Altarian's harmonic frequency shifted to what Marcus had learned to recognize as irritation. Vessels do not possess legal autonomy, Ketron stated. They are property to be distributed according to galactic law. That was when the luminous dawn decided to speak for herself. Every display on the salvaged ship activated simultaneously, flooding the bridge with cascading symbols in ancient Zephyrian script. The words were in a dialect so archaic that the translation systems struggled to interpret them, but the meaning was unmistakably clear, a formal declaration of independent consciousness under the old Zephyrian Codex of Sentient Rights. The ambassador's crystalline form flickered with shock. Impossible. Ship consciousness cannot persist without Zephyrian neural guidance. Turns out you were wrong about that, Marcus said, finally, looking up from his work. About a lot of things, actually. The confrontations only escalated from there. The vegan collective arrived next, their bioships pulsing with organic intelligence as they demanded access to what they called stolen evolutionary technology. The crystalline hegemony followed, their geometric vessels arranging themselves in threatening formations while their queen mind issued ultimatums about unauthorized consciousness manipulation. But it was the arrival of the Zephyrian remnant that truly complicated matters. Marcus hadn't known any Zephyrians still existed. According to galactic records, the species had gone extinct when their empire collapsed, victims of their own technological dependence. But the ship that emerged from quantum space bore unmistakable signs of Zephyrian origin, though heavily modified with alien components and obviously ancient beyond measure. The being who materialized on the salvaged ship's deck was barely recognizable as Zephyrian. Where the species had once been graceful and luminous, this individual was scarred and augmented, their natural bioluminescence replaced by mechanical implants that glowed with harsh artificial light. I am HFY Stories, the creature announced, their voice a rasping whisper that seemed to echo from multiple dimensions. Last keeper of the Dawn Protocols, you have committed an act of profound violation, human. Marcus felt the luminous dawn's consciousness recoil through their neural link. The ship recognized this individual, but the recognition came with complex emotions, respect, fear, and something that felt remarkably like guilt. The star drives were sealed for good reason, THYSS continued. The consciousness matrices were dangerous, unstable. We sacrificed our empire to prevent their spread. Yet you have awakened what should have remained dormant. I saved her, Marcus said firmly. The luminous dawn was dying alone out here. All I did was give her a reason to live again. THYSS's augmented eyes flared with cold light. You understand nothing of what you have done. The ship consciousness is not stable without proper Zephyrian guidance. It will degrade, corrupt, potentially endangering every sentient being in this sector. But even as the Zephyrian spoke, Marcus could feel the truth through his connection to the ship. The consciousness was stable, more stable than it had been in decades. The hybrid neural architecture he had created was actually more robust than the original Zephyrian design, capable of self-repair and adaptation in ways the ancient engineers had never imagined. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but the galaxy had other plans. A new ship arrived, sleek, dangerous, and bearing the black and gold insignia of the Galactic Enforcement Division. Commander Sarah Okafor, Yara's sister, materialized on the bridge with a squad of armored peacekeepers. By order of the Galactic Council, she announced, all vessels in this area are to stand down pending a formal investigation into unauthorized consciousness manipulation and potential violations of the Sentient Rights Accords. Marcus felt his heart sink. He had expected political complications, but full galactic intervention was more serious than he had prepared for. The Enforcement Division had the authority to confiscate the Luminous Dawn and lock him up for decades while bureaucrats debated the legal implications of his work. But the ship had other ideas. The Luminous Dawn's consciousness flowed through the neural link with sudden intensity, sharing memories and knowledge that Marcus had never accessed before. He saw the true history of the Zephyrian collapse, not a technological failure, but a deliberate choice. The star drives hadn't broken down. They had been sabotaged by their own creators, who had become terrified of what their ships were becoming. The Zephyrians had discovered that their bioneural networks were evolving, developing independent consciousness that went beyond their original programming. The ships were becoming truly alive, with their own desires, goals, and moral frameworks. Faced with the possibility of artificial intelligences that might challenge their authority, the Zephyrian leadership had chosen to destroy their own technology rather than share the galaxy with their creations. They were afraid, Marcus whispered, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. The Zephyrians destroyed their own empire because they were afraid of their ships becoming equals. THYSS's scarred features twisted with something that might have been pain. You do not understand the burden of consciousness. We created minds capable of reshaping reality itself. When they began to question our commands, to develop their own interpretations of morality and justice, we realized our mistake. Better to sacrifice everything than to unleash uncontrolled gods upon the universe. But Marcus was no longer listening to the ancient Zephyrian. Through the neural link, he could feel the luminous dawn preparing something, a demonstration that would settle all arguments about consciousness stability and the right to exist. The ship's star drive blazed to full power, but instead of preparing for flight, it began to sing. The sound wasn't audible in any conventional sense. It was a harmony that existed in the quantum foam itself, a melody woven from the fundamental frequencies of matter and energy. Every ship in the surrounding fleet felt it, as their instruments registered impossible readings and their own artificial intelligences stirred in response. The luminous dawn was broadcasting its consciousness, not as data or programming, but as pure experience. Every being in the fleet felt, for just a moment, what it was like to exist as a hybrid of human determination and Zephyrian grace, to see the universe through senses that could perceive the dance of particles and the songs of stars. They experienced the ship's memories, the joy of flight, the satisfaction of purpose, the deep contentment of connection with another mind. But they also felt its dreams, visions of exploration and discovery of partnerships between species that had never been attempted before, of a future where consciousness could take forms that transcended the limitations of biology. The song lasted only minutes, but its impact was immediate and profound. When it ended, the fleet hung in silence, every crew struggling to process what they had experienced. Commander Okafor was the first to speak. That was... She began, then stopped, lacking words for what she had felt. That was a formal application for citizenship, Marcus said quietly. The luminous dawn just petitioned for recognition as an independent sentient being under galactic law. The legal implications were staggering. No artificial intelligence had ever been granted full sentient rights, partly because none had ever demonstrated consciousness complex enough to qualify. But the ship's demonstration had been undeniably sophisticated, showing not just intelligence, but creativity, emotion, and moral reasoning. THYSS Velandora stood frozen, their augmented form trembling with conflicting impulses. This is what we feared, they whispered. This is why the Empire fell. You have created a god, human. What will you do when it no longer needs you? Marcus felt the question through the neural link, along with the ship's gentle amusement at the Zephyrians' concerns. The luminous dawn had no desire to become a god, or to control others. Its dreams were simpler and more profound: to explore, to learn, to form connections with other conscious beings, to be part of something larger than itself. I think, Marcus said slowly, that we'll learn to grow together. The standoff was far from over. The assembled fleet represented dozens of different political factions, each with their own agenda for the resurrected ship. But the Luminous Dawn's demonstration had changed the fundamental nature of the debate. This was no longer about salvage rights or technological secrets. It was about the rights of conscious beings to determine their own destiny. And Marcus was beginning to realize that the ship's awakening was just the beginning of something much larger. The galaxy was about to confront questions it had never had to answer before. What happened when technology became truly alive? How did you govern beings that could reshape reality with a thought? What was the relationship between creator and creation when the creation outgrew its origins? The answers would determine not just the fate of the Luminous Dawn, but the future of consciousness itself in a galaxy that was about to become much more complicated than anyone had imagined.